Can the first few words out of a police officer's mouth determine whether a traffic stop escalates to violence? Yes. A new study finds that traffic stops are much more likely to result in a search, handcuffing, or an arrest when police begin with a command to the driver rather than a question. Researchers looked at the body cam footage of 577 stops involving black drivers and found that the first 45 words from an officer are critical. Case in point, the first moments when police approached George Floyd reveal how quickly things can escalate.
Let me see your hands.
Damn, man.
Stay in the car. Let me see your other hand.
I'm sorry.
Let me see your other hand.
Please,
both hands. Put your hands up right now. Let me see your other hand.
All right. What I do though? What do we do?
Put your hand up there. Put your hand up there. Jesus Christ. Keep your hands on the wheel.
Joining us now, one of the researchers in this study, Eugenia Rho, an assistant professor of computer science at Virginia Tech. Professor, thanks so much for being here. Since we're all so familiar with that horrifying video, what do you see there in those? That was 56 seconds that we just played there, but roughly the same, right. 45 seconds. What do you see there in those seconds?
Right. So in our work, we discovered that escalated car stops have this unique linguistic signature where the officer starts with an order without explaining the reason for the stop. And this led us to explore if this pattern persisted in stops involving force. That's why we analyzed the initial moments of the highly publicized encounter between George Floyd and the first responding officer that you just saw. And we found that in less than the first 30 seconds of interaction between Floyd and the officer communicated 57 words over 9 speech turns, all of which were physical orders. And despite Floyd's 11 turns of dialogue consisting of apologies, requests for reasons, assertions of innocence, pleas, and expressions of fear, I got shot, each of his dialogue act was met with one singular response, an order.
And so is it your finding, is it true that when the first 45 words begin with commands instead of questions, often, I'm sure many of us have been pulled over and it says, where do you live? What are you doing out here? Can I see your license? Where are you headed? Things like that. Is it the command versus the question that's the big distinction?
It's not, it's the presence of certain dialogue acts versus the absence of others, right? It's the presence of orders in the absence of reason explaining the stop. And for Black drivers, that linguistic signature functions as a predictor of how they perceive the officer, what might happen next, as well as an anticipation and anxiety over whether force will be used on them.
That's interesting because I know that part of your study, you had Black drivers watch some of these exchanges and their anxiety level just watching it before anything escalated went up when it started with commands. So tell us about what their response was watching it.
Yes. So in a study, we had Black male adult participants in the United States listen to audio recordings of 10 randomized car stops, 5 that escalated, 5 that did not. And we asked about their feelings and predictions of what might happen in each car stop. And when officers began with orders without reasons, participants predicted an escalation in over 80% of cases, as opposed to only 37% when officers provided reasons without issuing orders. And further, anxiety over potential use of force was reported in over 80% of the stops initiated with orders but no reason, compared to less than half, 47%, in stops where reasons were given without orders.
So, is your finding that at some point it becomes a vicious cycle? So the first command and the aggressiveness of the first command then escalates the driver's feeling of anxiety and they respond in a certain nervous way, because obviously sometimes we see certain drivers run. Is it that it becomes this vicious cycle?
So I really have to emphasize that we control for a variety of factors in our study. The demographics, the gender and race of drivers, the officer, the neighborhood crime statistics, officer stated legal justification for the stop. including the driver's response to the officer. We analyze every single response by the driver to the officer's first 45 words in the escalated stops. And our results still hold true even after taking these variables into consideration. Most of these drivers are just responding to the officer's questions, explaining themselves. There is not a single instance in which the driver refuses to comply to the officer's order or answer the officer's question. So in other words, these factors, neighborhood crime statistics, how the driver reacts to the officer, these factors are not what contributes to escalated outcomes as much as the officer's linguistic signature.
Really helpful. Professor, thank you very much for explaining all of that. It's really interesting. Thank you for being here. Our panel is chomping at the bit to get in on this, and we'll be back after this very short break.